Hope you stay with me on my journey to become more fluent in English.
Should I speak formally in IELTS speaking?
You should not. It's better to think like it's a tea shop or a coffee shop conversation. But there is a limit, of course. You should not use any slang. You should not use any hip hop version of any English that you know, like what's up, dude? Things like that, of course. Avoid them. You can say you wanna, gonna. You can say those things. It is not a formal test. Let's keep it in the middle. It's a semi-formal test. It's not an informal test nor also a formal test. In Bangladesh we usually think it's a formal test whenever there is a test, but no, keep it semi-formal.
How much should I speak in the different parts of IELTS speaking?
There are three parts of IELTS speaking. In part 1 you should speak for more than one sentence. If they ask you your name, that's probably the first question, then you can just say in a few words just your name, or maybe in one sentence, my name is. But if they ask you any other question, and they will ask you a lot of questions, 5 or 6 questions or even more, please do not end in just one sentence. For example, if they say where do you live, if you just say I live in Gulshan, Dhaka, full stop, that's not a good answer in IELTS speaking part 1. Try to make it at least 2 to 4 sentences. If you don't have any ideas, then just give examples. You can say where it is located in Dhaka, it's in the heart of Dhaka, is it a bustling city? So for part 2, we all know that we have to speak for about 2 minutes, and it's a very good idea to keep speaking. Don't think about whether the 2 minutes are up or not. Just keep speaking and the examiner will stop you. So you don't have to touch all the questions. You don't have to think that, okay, within 2 minutes, I have to finish 3 or 4 bullet points. You just keep talking. Maybe you will touch 3 points out of the 4. It's fine. So keep speaking until the examiner stops you. In part 3, it is much longer than part 1, but not as long as part 2, because there are more questions in part 3, whereas there is only one big question in part 2. So try to speak for about 30 to 40 seconds. My suggestion is to think from many perspectives. If the examiner asks you, do you think that this is important? You can say that yes, it is very important. You can give some reasons. And if you feel like you finish within 10-20 seconds, you can talk about the other side. You can say that, okay, I think like this, but maybe some people will think like this, and why?
Is it okay if the examiner interrupts or stops me?
It's completely fine. Don't worry, guys. In part 1, the examiner may interrupt you if you keep going, but it's fine. Let's say they ask you where do you live and you start speaking for 3 or 4 sentences, the examiner will stop you because it's part 1. Do not worry about that. In part 2, it is actually good if the examiner stops you. That means that 2 minutes have passed. Now the examiner will move to part 3. It is much better to let the examiner stop you. And as I said, you don't have to talk about all the bullet points. In part 3 also, the examiner can stop you after you have talked for about half a minute. He or she will stop you. Sometimes though, another reason can be there for the examiner's interruption. Maybe the examiner wants to hear about something else, but you are repeating something you've already said in part 3, for example. It happened to me. He asked me a question, the examiner, I said my answer, and then he asked me what other thing could be there. And then I tried to explain. He said, no, not this, another thing. What else could be the reason? So in that case, an interruption can actually sign or signal that the examiner wants to hear of something else, or he wants to push you, he or she wants to push you to get another answer. But don't worry about them, it's completely fine. The one problem would be if the examiner keeps interrupting you because you do not understand his or her words. Then the examiner might think that, okay, you are not understanding the questions, and he or she will move on. But mostly do not worry about it.
Can I ask the examiner to repeat or explain a question?
You should. If you don't understand, or maybe you understand but you're not sure if whatever the examiner said is what you understand or not, please ask for clarification. If the examiner sometimes speaks too fast, you can ask the examiner to repeat the question. However, if you do it a lot of times, if you ask him or her thrice or 4 times, it might be a signal to the examiner that you cannot understand fast English. So if you have to ask for clarification, do it once or maximum twice. Don't do it more than 2 times.
Will I lose marks for my accent?
Not necessarily. We all have an accent. It's completely fine to have a little bit different accent from the standard English accent. So for example, many Bangladeshis, they say pen instead of pen. The standard English accent is the pronunciation is pen instead of pen. So for example, instead of John, Bangladeshi people say John. So it's fine, it's understandable. However, there are some extreme pronunciation examples. For example, if a Bangladeshi person says juice instead of juice, so that's a problem. So basically, if it has any problem in understandability, whether the examiner will find any problem in understanding you and in clarity of pronunciation, if that happens, that your pronunciation is not clear, then you will lose some marks. There is one more thing, which is rhythm. English is a musical language, so it goes up and down. You will notice that when I speak, I focus on sometimes the first syllable, sometimes the second syllable. For example, it's psychology. It's in the second syllable where the stress is placed. So if you do not have any idea about stress at all, don't worry about it. It doesn't have many marks. You can still get a 6 to 6.5, even to a 7, without worrying that much about sentence stress and word stress. But if you would like to get a higher band, then you have to do some studies, have some lessons on phonetics.
Do I need to paraphrase?
Paraphrasing means to say whatever the examiner said or whatever you said in a different way. In writing, it's very important. For example, whatever we write in the introduction, we repeat some things in the conclusion, but we say it in a different way. And also we paraphrase the question in the first paragraph as well. In speaking, it's not mandatory. If the examiner asks you, where do you live? You can say, I live in blank. You don't have to paraphrase the word live. However, it's a very good idea to paraphrase it. Why? Because it shows the examiner that you know other words. Instead of live, you can say I dwell in, or my hometown is. You can paraphrase it in a lot of different ways, especially if the question has a lot of words in the question. For example, what is one of your favorite memories from childhood? And if you answer like this, one of my favorite memories from childhood is or was that. So you are copying a large portion of the question. It will not result in any mark deduction, but this is throwing away a huge opportunity of showing off your vocabulary. So if you want to get a high band score, you can think about paraphrasing the question. Also, when you yourself are talking, sometimes you say it's a busy city. The next time, instead of saying this busy city, you can say this bustling city.
Should I use complex sentences?
Complex sentences mean that there is an independent clause and a dependent clause. Complex sentences aren't actually difficult. They are not complex, but they're relatively more complicated for beginner students or struggling students. So my suggestion is that don't get hung up about this. Don't feel too much bothered with complex sentences. You can speak simply, especially in speaking. Complex sentences are not as important as in writing. However, if you want to get a good score in grammar, then you will know that grammatical accuracy is important, but also grammatical complexity or the range of grammar is also important. So if you just speak in simple sentences, the examiner will not give you any marks for grammatical range. If you want to boost your grammar score, you should be learning how to use complex sentences, but it's much less required in speaking. In writing, it's much more required.
Is it okay if I memorize vocabulary items?
It's okay, but I do not suggest it. If you memorize any vocabulary items, then there is a high chance that you cannot use it appropriately. You know the word, but you cannot use the word in a sentence. Or maybe you're thinking about using the word, so you're not really fluent, you're hesitating. So instead of boosting your score, what might happen, and it's quite common, what might really happen is that you lower your score in fluency or even in vocabulary. You're trying to improve your vocabulary score by using some words, but you are actually reducing it because of an incorrect sentence structure.
Which one is better, video call test or face-to-face test?
Many people know about the computer-based test already, that you sit on a computer, take the test of reading, listening and writing. However, the speaking, it may not actually be a video call test. Even if you sit for a computer-based test, it may be a face-to-face test. For example, my computer-based test, even though I chose the computer-based test, I had a face-to-face interview for my speaking part. And it might also happen the opposite way. You have chosen the face-to-face exam, the paper-based test, but you have a video call test. So it depends on the exam center's availability, on the country's political situation, on maybe some random matters as well. So do not think about which one is better or not. There are pros and cons to both. One good thing about a video call test is that you can see the timer, so you know how much time has passed, especially in part 2. Also, some people feel less afraid when it's a video call test. When it's an individual face-to-face test, they feel more pressure, they feel more nervous. One problem might be that sometimes, but it's rare, but it may happen, the chance is not zero, sometimes there could be some technical issues like sound related issues. If that happens, please let the examiner know.
Is a Bangladeshi examiner better than a foreign examiner?
Well, a Bangladeshi examiner will have an accent in English which is probably more familiar to you if you're also a Bangladeshi person. On the other hand, many people have complained that Bangladeshi examiners, they do not give a lot of marks in speaking. No matter your performance, your score will not be maybe 7 or 7.5. Or even if your performance is great, it will not be 8. So we cannot test this factor because this is a subjective test, right? Even though there are some marking criteria, the rubrics are there, still one person might give you 8, another person might give you 7.5. So 0.5 up and down, it can happen. That's why the EOR is there, the inquiry on results, EOR. If you're very, very unsatisfied with your score, you may apply for that, and if your marks increase even by 0.5, you'll get the money back. But to answer the question, it may be that Bangladeshi examiners are better, or it may also be that they are worse because they give less marks, because most native speakers, I don't want to generalize, but they appear friendly. From reviews that I have seen, they appear more friendly than local examiners, but I cannot say anything about it.
But it's not in our hand also. We cannot select.
We cannot select our speaking examiner. We can also not select whether it's a face-to-face test or it's a video call test. We can initially select one option, but then it can change. So these are the 10 most frequently asked questions and some difficult questions about the speaking module. I intentionally didn't talk about very basic questions like what are the rubrics, what does lexical resource mean. I wanted to bring in some very difficult, and yes, they are most frequently asked questions, but also difficult ones, not the basic ones. So hope you enjoyed and hope you will stay with me on my journey to become more fluent in English. Please subscribe if you liked the content.
And even if they have some questions, they can ask it in the
Of course,
comment
on
box.
the comments. You can also email me. Thank you so much.